You're listening to the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast, and I'm your host, Karen Swizik. This is the podcast where a bit of business and a bite of technology come together. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast. And today I'm chatting with Nitya Rajendran. Nitya is a senior associate at Tribeca Venture Partners. She leads sourcing and diligence and serves as a board observer for ACV Auctions, Domio, Porter Road, and Vivi. And prior to joining the firm, Nitya was an investment banking analyst at Lazard, where she received the Andre Meyer Fellowship. Nitya graduated magna cum laude from Georgetown University with a BA in Classics and a minor in Economics. She serves on the Trinity Alumni Women's Committee and is a board member for Off the Record, an organization that creates curated forums for founders. And in addition, actually, earlier this year, you were part of the list for the 2020 Venture Capital Journal 40 Rising Stars. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so welcome to the show. And I'm curious to know, we could start a little bit with your background. So you grew up on the Upper West Side, and you're going to laugh at me because every time I hear Upper West Side, Upper East Side, I automatically think Gossip Girl.
I get that a lot. So
that's all I know. So I'm curious to know, growing up at the Upper West Side of New York, what was that like?
Well, I can assure you that my life was nothing like what you saw in Gossip Girl. So I'll say that. But yeah, I loved growing up in New York in general. I'm a diehard New Yorker, and there's just so much diversity here. You get exposure to so many different life experiences and so many different kinds of people and cultures. So I loved it. Specifically, the Upper West Side was an amazing place to grow up. It really has a neighborhood vibe. You almost feel like it's a small town in a way. I went to school a mile away from my house, and so basically that 1 mile stretch is where I did everything. So it almost had the vibe where you would run into people, on a random weekend at the movie theater, and it was embarrassing or fun or whatever. Some of my favorite memories from growing up are going to the grocery store Fairway, which now might be closing, which is very sad. But I remember going there with my dad every Sunday, and it was, I don't know if you've ever been there, Karen, but if you go to the Upper Side before the Fairway closes, you should go. That grocery store has so much energy, and it's always bustling. It to me just epitomizes all the kind of crazy, amazing energy that New York has to offer. So I loved the Upper West Side.
Yeah, it's actually been quite some time since I've been to New York. The last time I've gone was in 2011. That was my second time, and I feel every time I go, I don't cover enough ground. Like you're saying, there's so many different neighborhoods, and yeah, I think maybe I'm overdue for a visit. I should go back.
Yeah, 9 years is a long time. I feel like you should come back. We can come up with a hit list of the deep cuts.
Your recommendations. All right. So I always ask people about their career backgrounds, and I want to know what made you decide to become a VC, because I feel like it's not something that, people talk or when you're a kid, when you say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I highly doubt, or maybe you did. You said I want to be a VC, or even in high school. When did that idea come about?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say I really started very seriously considering venture as a career when I was doing banking at Lazard. So, about probably a year and a half into banking, I was thinking about what did I want to do next? I thought I had learned a ton in banking, and I wanted to keep learning. And I wanted to find something that I was really, truly passionate about. So I was kind of thinking back on my experiences throughout life, and I was what have I really enjoyed? What have I felt passionate about? And one thing I had done during my undergrad at Georgetown is there was a fund called the Social Innovation Public Service Fund. And that was $1.5 billion fund out of Georgetown. And we would invest money into student entrepreneurs and alumni entrepreneurs. And I had been the director of operations there. So it had been my role to basically vet these entrepreneurs and then actually work with them once we made an investment. And as I was thinking back, that was one of the most rewarding things I had done up until that point in my life. Actually working so closely with these entrepreneurs, helping them build something, helping them realize their dreams was so fulfilling. So as I was thinking about where I wanted my career to go next, I was like, okay, I need to do something where I'm working with entrepreneurs and I'm like actually moving the needle in some way. So that plus the financial skill set I gained at Lazard sort of led me to venture, which is a good marriage between that passion for entrepreneurship and finance. So that was sort of how I decided to get into venture. And then actually getting into venture is like a whole other thing, but that was what made me realize I really wanted to pursue venture.
I think that's why a lot of people kind of want to get into that ecosystem. It's just this, you know, getting involved or like seeing everyone build cool things and really want to be a part of the like helping support them and build their dream. So I'm assuming like with any job, like any start of your career, do you mind sharing it, if you encountered any obstacles and how did you overcome them during the start of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I basically decided I wanted to go into venture. And then I was like, okay, cool. I'm a very goal-oriented person. So I was like, once I decided this, how am I actually going to go do it? So I did so much reading on the internet. I mean, the great thing is there are tons and tons of blog posts out there about how to get a job in venture or just generally the industry. So I did a lot of that work. And basically every blog post I was finding was like, use your network, leverage your network. And I was like, I don't have a network. I'm 23 years old. I was working, crazy hours. I didn't have time to go to networking events. That to me was my first roadblock where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get past this one. So what I did was instead of going to all the networking events, which I could not do at my current job, is I emailed a bunch of people in venture who had also gone to Georgetown. And I wrote like a very, kind of short and sweet email, attached my resume, explained why I was really passionate about venture. And, about like a third to a half of those people actually responded. And I was able to get coffees with them or talk to them on the phone. And they were so helpful. They, explained more to me about the tech ecosystem and the VC ecosystem. Some of them even sent me job postings. So that was, really valuable for me. So I always do try to pay it forward now because I know all those people really helped me. But at the end of the day, I actually I came up with like a list of my dream firms where I wanted to work, and Tribeca was on that list. And luckily enough for me, 6 months later, they had published a job posting. So I ended up actually just applying through their website.
Cool. So it's kind of like you manifested it. You just like wrote it down, and then all of a sudden the job ends up popping up.
I guess so.
So, what kind of skills would you say are needed to become a successful investment associate?
That's a great question. I will say it really depends on the kind of firm that you're going to. So, if you're a later stage firm versus an earlier stage firm where the emphasis of your role will be different. But I would say like higher level, a couple of things that will always be necessary are, I think, strong analytical skills. So are you able to assess, the market opportunity for a company? Are you able to, dive deep into the weeds of the way the company operates, but then also be able to take a step back and understand the bigger picture of things? Are you able to communicate those thoughts succinctly? Like so much of a VC's job is talking to their firm and like trying to make a case for why that's a good company, but also being able to be flexible with your thoughts. So like in our investment committee meetings when we're arguing about deals, like respectfully, but we all have really strong opinions, but you have to be able to like sort of roll with the punches and be flexible and sort of internalize what people are saying and maybe change your opinion. That's okay. And I think the really important one is founder empathy. So much of my job is talking to founders and working with them closely. And so being able to empathize with how hard it is to be a founder and all the things that are on their plates, especially in those early days when they don't necessarily have a big team. I think founder empathy is really crucial.
Mm-hmm. Since we're on the topic of founders, do you think they make good VCs? Because as we were talking about prior to recording this conversation, it seems like a lot of people who founded companies, they also end up investing in other companies as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like always tough to generalize, but I would say high level, I completely understand why a former entrepreneur would make a great venture capitalist. I think, going back to that point about founder empathy, no one will understand more what a founder is going through than a former founder themselves. So, I think when you're in a board meeting and everyone is telling you, hey, you should really try to fix these like 12 things before our next board meeting in 2 months. that can be really tough versus maybe a former operator could say, hey, I know we just gave you those 12 things. Here are like the real two like that you should actually prioritize. So I think there can be more founder empathy there. But I obviously don't have an operating background, and I don't necessarily think that not having operating experience is a bad thing either. But I can see why it would make you a good venture capitalist as well.
Mm-hmm. So there are different types of investment firms, such as we're talking about, like investment firms that invest in early stage companies and then later stage companies as well. So if you were to start off on your like VC journey, like how would you decide as to which type of firm would be the best fit for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I thought about a lot when I was trying to figure out, what firm I would want to join. I would say it depends on a couple of things. One is like, honestly, what excites you the most? These companies at different levels, like a seed stage company versus a Series D stage company, they're all very different, and working with them requires different things. They have different struggles and different needs. So, like, if you want to be a really, really early stage investor, like typically the teams are between, 3 and 20 people. So there's probably more heavy lifting for you to do. And like that's when the company is trying to figure out product market fit, or if they have product market fit, like they still need to scale like crazy. So there's maybe more hands-on work in that way. If you want to be a later stage investor, hopefully by then the company is really rocking and rolling. They've scaled already, and like they just need help scaling even more. But things are generally working. So at that point, you're kind of optimizing. So it's a different kind of work. And then from the junior investor perspective, I think the emphasis of your responsibilities will be different too. So this is a huge generalization, but generally, if you're at an earlier stage firm, there tends to be more of an emphasis on sourcing. So trying to find tons of great startups for your firm to invest in, versus at a later stage firm, you might be more focused on doing diligence for those companies. So it also kind of depends on how you like to spend your time. I love where we invest. We do Series A deals, which is pretty early stage, but not like seed stage, which is super early. So it means that companies have typically found product market fit, but there's still like a lot to do from our end. So it's kind of a fun combination of sourcing and diligence.
So for myself, and I'm sure a lot of the other listeners are curious to know, what is the difference between seed stage funding and Series A?
Yeah, it's actually, even internally, we don't really like to use these sort of like names for rounds because I think it's become so fluid. Like there are seeds, seed twos, super seeds. Like there are so many things now. So I mean, okay. I'll say that since I joined Tribeca 3 years ago, I have seen these names change. So I would imagine, generally the ecosystem has really changed. But I would say like high level, a seed round, like is maybe you've built the product out, you're just starting to go into market. Like it's very early days. But the threshold for a seed stage deal has sort of shifted from like pre-product to like probably having product. And then Series A, where we like to invest high level, is when a company has found product market fit, things are working, and they just really need capital to scale like crazy. So that's high level how I think about the distinction between the two.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I'm sure, given that New York has a huge startup community, and I'm sure that your investment firm, they get a lot of pitches. So how do you decide whether or not you feel a startup would be a good investment for your particular firm? Like what kind of things do you look for?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. So there are two big things. The first is that there has to be a huge market opportunity. And the second is it has to be the right founder to tackle that. We won't move forward with any company if they don't at least check those two boxes. So if you're a founder and you walk into a VC's office, you should be prepared to explain why this is a massive market opportunity that you're tackling and what makes you the best person to tackle it. So those are kind of like the most important things that we think about. And then besides those two things, we like I said, once the company has found product market fit, and we'll really dig around the data to understand, if they have and get conviction around those things.
Mm-hmm. In your current portfolio, do you have like a few startups that you like to talk about, like some startups that you feel are rising stars?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think they're all rising stars. I'll talk about one is this company called ACV Auctions. It's a mobile app for car dealers to facilitate wholesale vehicle auctions. So this is not an industry that I actually knew anything about before, but it's one of those classic, like, antiquated industries that needed to be brought into the 21st century. So I guess the way like, used car salespeople would typically buy their inventories, they would go to a physical auction and not really even be able to see the car they were purchasing, and they would do it. ACV Auctions has basically put all of this info into an app. So you can actually get all the information about the car, and then bid from your desk. You don't even have to go anywhere. And this company has grown massively since we first invested 4 years ago, and they recently were valued at $1.5 billion. So that's been really exciting to be part of that journey. Another company that I work closely with is a company called Domio. They lease upscale buildings and floors of buildings as a long-term tenant, and then they monetize and operate them as short-term rentals. So think about all of those, Airbnbs you've gone to where they're like not what you expected them to be. Domio basically provides a consistent, like, high-end branded experience, but it's able to operate much more efficiently than a hotel because it doesn't have all the overhead. So we led their Series A in 2018, and GGV just led their Series B this past summer. So another one that's very exciting.
Ooh, that does sound exciting. So speaking of investments, or continuing along the conversation, was there ever a time where you made an investment where you just went with your gut? You're like, I know this is going to be, a really good investment.
To some extent, I think there's always a gut instinct when you like a founder and the company, and it just clicks and you feel like this could be huge. Like, you have to have that kind of excitement in your belly. But I never invest purely on gut. I think there has to be that good gut feeling for you to want to go forward and dive into the data. But I do always end up sort of diving into more of the details there to corroborate how I'm feeling. Only at that point would I feel comfortable investing.
Mm-hmm. So with Tribeca, I understand that your company only invests in companies within the U.S. So I'm curious to know, do you know of any potential plans to expand outside of the U.S.? I'm just thinking because I'm based in Canada and I'm relatively close to, like, Toronto and Waterloo, and both of them are, like, huge tech startup communities.
Yeah, I think we're open to it. Our main focus has always been on New York, like you said, and the East Coast of the U.S. more broadly, but we're open to it.
Oh, okay. Cool. So I also know that one of your achievements was that recently you were a contributing author for the FinTech chapter in the newly released book called Finding Genius. Can you explain to us, number one, what is the book in general about, and also what is your chapter about?
Absolutely. So the book is a very interesting idea. Another investor in the ecosystem, Kanal Mehta, it was his idea, and he's the one who kind of put the book together. But basically, the premise of it is that the first half of the book is he interviewed a bunch of really prominent venture capitalists and got their advice around what do they think makes a great entrepreneur? How do you succeed in this business? So he collected all that and put them into these really great chapters in the first half of the book. And then in the second half of the book, he basically asked a bunch of his friends in the VC ecosystem, me being one of them, to write chapters on the various industries that we focus on. So, there are chapters on AI, there are chapters on healthcare technology, there are chapters on blockchain or social media, and I wrote the chapter on fintech. My chapter was pretty extensive. I chose to focus on the fintech evolution that happened after the 2008 financial crisis. That was a really pivotal moment for fintech in general, because, a lot of the financial institutions either crumbled or had to retreat. And it created this opening for better customer experiences, for more technology within the space. So my chapter sort of dives into that, and I'm able to interview a bunch of venture capitalists who have invested predominantly in fintech, as well as a lot of really big name entrepreneurs who've done amazing things for fintech, such as David Klein from Common Bond, which is one of our portfolio companies, as well as like Sally Krawcheck from Ellevest or John Stein from Betterment. So it was a lot of work, but it was really fun.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate because I also co-authored a book that recently came out. But yeah, no, that's really cool. I actually added it to my reading list, but hopefully I'll get around to it soon. I'm that type of person who reads like 3 books at a time.
Yeah.
Constantly like adding, like when somebody recommends a book, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta add that to my list. So.
And doesn't it take so much longer to write a book than you thought it would?
Yeah, the thing is, it's so funny because they're like, oh, okay, it's just gonna be a chapter, but when you think about it, it never really is just a chapter. Like going through so many edits, and then I was like reading it over and over again to the point where like, okay, I can't read or edit this anymore. I need another set of eyes to take a look at it because I'm, like when you're constantly looking at the same thing, you can't see it from a different perspective.
Oh yeah, completely. I think you're right. Like, with fintech in particular, there's so many things you could really dive deep into, like all the regulatory changes and stuff. And I was like, you know what? I don't have time for this in the chapter. Or like, I don't know, in your book, if you had to interview people, but transcribing interviews takes a surprising amount of time. I spent so many hours transcribing these conversations I had had. But, at the end of the day, it was still a really fun process. And I'm so glad I was able to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, for the podcast alone, I also include show notes where it's a transcription of the conversation. So that I found takes a little bit of time, even though I am using like a tool, Otter.ai, but obviously it's not perfect, so I have to do some edits. But I remember I have a blog, and with some of my blog posts, I actually recorded the interviews versus doing email interviews, which I find is so much easier. So once I recorded that, and then I realized, oh, I said I was going to put into a blog post. So yeah, going through that blog post, the recording first and transcribing into a blog post, that took a lot of time. And that was before I knew transcription tools existed. So it took like forever.
Yeah, I tried a couple of transcription tools. I couldn't find one that worked for me. So next time I have to do something like this, I'm going to ask you for help on that.
No problem. So, what would you say was the best piece of advice someone has given to you about building a career in venture capitalism?
That is a good question. Let me think about that. I think one of the really good pieces of advice I got was just to follow your intellectual curiosity. I should have mentioned that also in my answer about what makes you a good venture capitalist, but I think intellectual curiosity is so important. There's going to be, like, I would say that when I'm trying to find interesting companies, one thing that I'll do is like, I will just actually go down the internet rabbit holes. I will have, a thought, and then I'll say, why hasn't anyone solved this, or have they? And then I'll just start Googling, and you end up reading things. But I think just sort of following that path and, letting yourself indulge in that intellectual curiosity can be so important, because you're going to find random things that you wouldn't have necessarily found before. And you know what? Nothing might come of it, but something also might. There have been times where I've done research and on all these things maybe 2 years ago, and then I happen to meet a company that's doing that exact thing. So I would say intellectual curiosity is, following that is the best advice I've gotten so far.
Mm-hmm. So tying back into networking, so do you go to a lot of networking events where they have those pitch startup competitions?
Yes. Yes. Short answer is yes.
Because I just like automatically think of, those two TV shows where like on the Canadian side, Dragon's Den, and in the US, there's a Shark Tank.
Yep.
Have you ever been a judge actually on any of those? I'm curious to know.
I have. It's hard. I think it's so hard for founders when they do those, because a lot of times they have to summarize their business in like between 2 to 5 minutes. So I have so much empathy as they're trying to go through that. And then it's tough as a judge, because you're like, I don't really know how to fairly assess this business because I only heard your pitch for 2 minutes. But I think whenever I've been in those situations, I do try to talk to entrepreneurs a little bit on the side to understand more, and then assess the best that you can. But those could be fun. I think it's also good for the audience to see, what does it look like. When you're an entrepreneur, it's kind of helpful, I think, to see this is what other entrepreneurs' pitches look like, and these are the kind of questions that venture capitalists are going to ask them, so they can be more prepared when they go into a meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been to a couple of them, and I give them props, because I can't even imagine like being up on stage and just talking about your company with everybody like watching and you being judged. Actually, it's interesting because a podcast interview I did recently, it was a pitch startup competition, but it was also cool in that you were given like play money, and you can use it to like invest the play money in the startups that you thought were like deserving of your money. So I thought it was cool, kind of like pretending to be an investor.
Yeah, that's a fun spin on it.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question, it actually has nothing to do with venture capitalism or investing, but I saw on the company website that you love to sing and you're really into musical theater. So I think that's kind of cool. Like, how did you get into that? It's great because it's a New York thing, right?
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. I guess, when I was a kid, I was always just running around the house and like making up songs and forcing my parents to sit down and, tape whatever new song I had come up with. So I think pretty early on, I think I was like 6 years old, they put me into singing classes so I could use that creative energy, if you will. So, I started singing with musical theater. I even did some classical music. But yeah, I've always been a huge Broadway nerd. Like whenever we would take family road trips, we'd always be jamming out to whatever, new Broadway musical, whether that was like Rent or Phantom of the Opera or, we jammed that hard. So I think singing has always been a really big, important part of my life. I think I sang in high school and college, and I worked so hard in my classes. I worked so hard, but singing was a good outlet for me. I think, I needed to be able to sort of use my creative energy. And I think, it's actually been really good for me now too. So I sort of stopped singing. I mean, you never really stop singing. You can only sing around the house, but I actually joined a local theater group last year. And I realized it was important for me to sort of have those outside of passions besides work. And I think it's actually made me better at my job in some ways because it allows me to, go and use the other side of my brain, be able to sing and dance and use that sort of creative energy and then come back to my job feeling really fulfilled in like a different kind of way and be more focused in a way.
Yeah, as you were mentioning that, I actually just had like a funny idea in my head for a musical. There should be like one that focuses around like the startup community and like pitching and being a VC. Would you be interested in that kind of thing?
You write it, I'll start it.
All right, sounds good. If people wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about Tribeca Venture Partners, where can they find you online?
Yeah, you can always LinkedIn message me. I actually respond. Or you can always look at our website. I think we have an email address, info@tribecavp.com. So either of those is good. And, we actually do look at all of those emails and I look at all my messages. So that's probably the best way.
Awesome. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks everyone for tuning in and stay tuned for more episodes. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and share this podcast with your family and friends. You can follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Bacon Bits and Bites. And on Twitter, it's baconbits_bites. Ciao for now.